often do we create a new country? It's a pretty rare thing to be in a country when it's born. The newest country in our world today is South Sudan. South Sudan is a country that I have lived and worked in since 2008. And I had the privilege of being there when the country was born. And it was a happy day. But I expect for most of you, you don't know much about South Sudan. So briefly, South Sudan gained its independence from the Sudan in 2011. And sadly, it enjoyed a mere 18 months of a very fragile peace before it plummeted into its own civil war. And today, despite signed peace agreements, that war continues. And there is famine in some parts of the country now. And overall, we have one of the worst humanitarian crises in our world today in South Sudan. And it's all man-made. But as I said, you probably haven't given South Sudan that much thought or don't feel that strong a connection. And so I ask you to ask yourselves that very important question, so what? As I talk about the country and how it finds itself in this sensitive space between war and peace, what connection do you have? And I want to invite you also to consider, or possibly reconsider, your individual role in building a more peaceful world. But first, I want to share with you that I'm going to make an assumption about you all. I'm going to assume that you are all conscious, caring human beings who use your compassion and your wisdom as you go about your day. Is that okay? Great, thank you. So let me take you back to 2011, to Christmas 2011. Do you remember where you were? Do you remember who you were with? What you were doing? Well, I hope, like me, you were relaxing in the company of people that you love. This is Elizabeth. And I want to share the very brief story that Elizabeth has of Christmas Day 2011 for her. She's from South Sudan. And already, just a few months after the country is born, you begin to see how this fragile peace is already cracking.
My village was attacked on Christmas Day 2011. People kept saying, they are coming, but we remained in church praying. Then the attackers came and there was shooting everywhere. I ran with my children, both of whom were born in Khartoum and had never experienced anything like this. We were in the bush for 7 days without food and water. One day we came across a puddle with dirty water, and when I gave it to one of my sons, he asked me, "Mama, what is this? Is it custard?" I said, "No, my son. It is water from God. Drink it." That is how we survived.
A few months after Elizabeth and her children suffered this horror, Elizabeth joined an initiative called the Roots Project. And the Roots Project was set up to foster social inclusion and specifically to provide economic empowerment for South Sudanese women. So basically, the women could come to the Roots Project and earn enough money to live through the creation of their art, their traditional arts and crafts. So nearly everywhere in South Sudan, there's a tradition of beading, using beads to create jewelry and other arts and crafts. And so the women come together and they earn their money creating this art. And here are some examples. And when Elizabeth first joined the Roots Project, she actually had a hard time. She experienced some prejudice from some of the other women. Elizabeth is from the Merle tribe, and some people believe that the Merle people have special powers that they use against other people in the conflict. And there are similar prejudices and beliefs about other tribes. So there was a time at the Roots Project where some women from Equatoria, which is in the south of the country, encountered some Dinka women. And the Dinka women said to the Equatorian women, "We didn't want you in this project at the beginning because we were sure that you were going to poison us because you're women from Equatoria. And the Equatorian women responded, and they said, well, we thought you were going to beat us up because you're Dinka women. Now, fortunately, they'd worked together enough to realize that they could laugh, and they could overcome and let go of these prejudices. These prejudices fuel the fighting. And so very gradually, these women have learned to trust each other, and they've become friends. And they've reached a point where they can re-identify themselves as South Sudanese women, or as mothers, or as beaders, before they see themselves as coming from a particular tribe. And now these women are actually advocates for peace, because they leave work at the Roots Project, and they go home to their communities, and they influence their communities away from fighting. So it's a difficult journey that they've made, but gradually, as they've become friends, they're starting slowly, slowly to build their own new, brave, hopefully peaceful world. I've been really encouraged, and I found hope in projects like the Roots Project, because as I said, I've worked in South Sudan for 9 years, and I'm really sad to say today that all I've seen is an increase in bloodshed and fighting. And these projects like the Roots Project really give space to these women. My last job when I was in South Sudan, I was part of the organization that's responsible for monitoring and investigating and reporting on the peace process. I went with my team to this village shortly after it had been burnt down in the fighting. I saw the school ransacked. I saw the hospital, the health center, destroyed. And I saw what hadn't been looted of the food burnt. This is corn. We were able to visit this village thanks to a group of young men who, like many of you, love their families, love their homes. And I sat with these young men in the bush as they recounted some of the horrors that their communities had experienced. And I worry about these young men. I think about them because I think they possibly have one of the hardest journeys to find any kind of peaceful future. War is stark. I don't know how this country is going to find a way to build itself. Why is it always the regular people that suffer most in a war? But so what, right? It's sad, but what can you do? Well, actually, I'd like to thank you, because you already do something. You contribute already financially. The Swiss government, the UK government, the US government, and many others are involved in the effort for peace in South Sudan. So a little bit of your tax contributions makes its way to South Sudan. Similarly, the United Nations. The UN peacekeeping mission in South Sudan is the second largest UN mission in the world. And so, why are we so ready to continue to invest our resources in a country that seems to be locked into an ever-worsening conflict? Well, there's many reasons. The country has oil, but possibly more important is its geopolitical relevance. South Sudan is in East Africa. It borders a region of the world that is fertile ground for violent extremism. It is in all of our interests to make sure that that part of the world is stable. But it is an extremely challenging endeavor to support a country like South Sudan to navigate its way in this space between war and peace. It's hard. Peace is difficult. It's messy, it's unpredictable, it's volatile. It takes a long time. It's hard to find, it's even harder to hold on to. And why? Because it's about human beings. It's about human beings who have been so deeply hurt, both physically and psychologically, that they have an unimaginably difficult task to overcome the trauma, to reconcile, and to find some means of living together with their enemy. But it's projects like the Roots Project and other homegrown initiatives that really make the difference from my perspective, because they create a safe space for human beings to come together. And that's what it's about. It's about humans relating to humans and finding a way to overcome the trauma. But that is difficult, and it's messy, and it doesn't always work the first time. It's high risk. And that's something that the donors find increasingly hard to fund. And so what do? We end up, as donors, funding the safer options. But the safe things aren't usually the things that build a lasting peace. It's those small, micro projects that, as I said, bring one human being together with another human being, enable them to build trust, and finally, after time, probably after failing a few times, they're able to change their perspective and finally change their behavior. And when that works, it's extremely powerful. I've seen it. It's so encouraging to see how human beings can change their perspective and eventually their behavior. And the more they succeed, the safer we all are, thousands of miles away, wondering what on earth our connection is with them. Every time I hear about another terrorist attack, or about some more people who have lost their lives as they've tried to flee across the Mediterranean Sea, it becomes more evident to me that we can no longer ignore what's happening over there. It's in our interest, because we have evolved to realize what has always been the truth. We are all interconnected. That a war in the middle of the African continent affects the peace in the middle of the European continent. So please, keep developing your humanity. And how? Engage more with people about these very complex issues. Talk to more people who don't have your same opinion, perhaps. Ask yourself some of the difficult questions. What went wrong with South Sudan? Why didn't this new country of ours blossom? We need to recognize that an individual, whether it's a civilian or a fighter who's caught up in a conflict somewhere a long way away, requires our attention. And I know, because you're all conscious, caring human beings, I know that you know how good it feels when we exercise our compassion and our courage and our wisdom for someone who we may never know. In the end, it's pretty simple. When we strengthen peace elsewhere, we strengthen peace right here. Thank you very much.